Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Politics Matters podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Jakubowski, and today we're going to be looking at the polling we got from these past few weeks, or 2 weeks specifically, and why they're making me a little more confident in the Democratic Party's chances this November. But before we get started with that, go follow me on Twitter. I'm at Ryan Jakubowski. Go read my Substack. I recently posted about Tony Evers and his chances of winning re-election. That's upyt.substack.com. Check out my YouTube channel, Unbiased Election Predictions. Check out all my stuff. I do a lot of stuff, so if you like the podcast, I hope you'll like my other stuff too. But, yeah, just needed that shameless plug here. Yeah, I think we're just gonna get right into it here with some polling. This is what I like. You know, I'm personally in a pretty good mood right now because I have a fun day ahead of me, and also because I get to sit down at my desk with a pencil between my middle and ring finger, and I get to talk about polling and act like I'm smart because that's how I like to spend my free time. But it's actually really fun because we can look at these polls and we can learn a lot about them, really, because we can see, like, just to get started with this, there's a lot of obvious stuff, right? Like, Joe Biden is indubitably unpopular. The Democrats right now are not in a position, like, the Democrats aren't in a horrific position, right? Like things have been worse for them, but they're definitely in a worse position than they were 2 years ago. Even, you know, this is probably their worst spot since, you know, maybe 2016, maybe 2014. We don't know exactly. We'll have to see by November, but not a good time to be a Democrat right now. But things have been worse before, and we have dealt with this before. So, yeah. Now, we're just going to look at some polling we've got, and I'm just going to briefly talk about Biden's approval rating right now. And so when you look at the Biden numbers we've got, as of right now on 538, Joe Biden has a 40.8% approval rating, so not great. That's pretty low. His lowest ever was, I think, just 40% when it was, I think, 2 days after Russia invaded Ukraine. And it's been pretty stable. It's been high 40s, low 41s the past few weeks. And, you know, really, I think what this says is that Biden won't move at all. Like, I'd be surprised if he is lower than 40 or higher than 42 by election day in November. And honestly, like, I think we're kind of, like, even the most optimistic on Democrats now have kind of moved past the whole Biden is going to rebound or he's going to get back up to 45% before election day 2022, right? And, like, you know, I get that, but the people who like, okay, when Biden's approval first fell, it collapsed in August and September, really. And when that happened, it was right after the Afghanistan withdrawal, and everyone was saying, or not everyone, but a lot of people were saying that, oh, once Afghanistan's out of the news cycle, he'll go back, it'll be fine, right? And I get that, but the logic was flawed, and it was an awful, not an awful, but the assumption was based on false pretenses, and Biden, you know, once Afghanistan left the news cycle after a month, it didn't rebound. You know, people had more beef with Biden, and that's to be expected. Presidents become unpopular after the first few months of their presidency, and Biden was no exception. And that's just the way it is. But, like, Obama, who was by all means a popular dude, right? He won re-election. He had, you know, his approval rating was still pretty good. Like, when you look at how popular Biden was, or Obama was, he was still above water for most of his presidency, or at least was, you know, doing all right by the end of it. And so he was more popular than both Biden and Trump. And even Obama had these falls in approval in, you know, 2009, 2010. And so I just think that as a result of that, it was kind of unreasonable to expect Biden wasn't, you know, in spring of 2021, after, you know, beginning of Biden's presidency, you know, there were people who thought, well, you know, Biden's at 54% approval, 40% disapproval. Why is he going to fall below 50 if we're so polarized, right? And, like, I kept hearing that argument, and, you know, I was given that, right? But it was a flawed assumption, because if you said that about Trump, because Trump had a good approval rating for the first 2 weeks of his presidency, right? Like, you know, you could say all those things, and you can say them all you want, but it wasn't going to be the case. So, I'm here to tell you that I don't think that the Biden being negative 13% federally means much, because the thing with approval is that approval is an ambiguous word. Like, okay, for those of you who don't know, I'm a Democrat. I would have voted for Biden in 2020. I'd probably vote for him again, especially with the way the Republican Party is going right now. And I don't know if I approve of Joe Biden or not. I think if I were asked, I'd say I approve, but I don't, it's not like I don't think I strongly approve Joe Biden. I'd probably say I somewhat approve of Biden because I think he's doing relatively well given the hand he was dealt, but I don't think he's been that great of a president either. So it's ambiguous, and there are a lot of people who voted for Biden who will vote for the Democrats in November who do not approve of Joe Biden because they think he isn't doing enough or they have beef with his presidency. They have nitpicks. I've said this before. And when you look at the groups he's fallen the most with, they're not swing voters. They're black and Hispanic voters that probably voted for him in 2020. And when those groups are trending away from him, it either means that we're seeing a fundamental realignment in politics, which is probably like a 5% chance of that happening. I'd be very surprised if the Republicans crack 25% with black voters and win the Hispanic vote, because that would be ludicrous. But either that's happening, or what's probably happening is a lot of voters of color don't like Biden. They nitpick his presidency, and they're either not going to vote in 2022, or they're going to vote for the Democrats because they don't like the Republican Party. And I think it's going to be option B. I think that a lot of these voters who say they don't like Joe Biden are just black and Hispanic voters, and some of them are white progressives too, but specifically the progressive wing of the party doesn't like Biden because they don't think he's doing enough or whatever, and they're still going to vote for the Democratic Party in November because they can't handle the GOP. That's what it is. If you think that the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are going to match their share of Biden's approval, you misunderstand politics, because if that were the case in 2018, the Republican Party would have lost the 2018 midterms by a lot more, and they would have lost, like, Trump was underwater in Florida and even Texas and even, I don't know, he was supposedly underwater in Indiana and Missouri in some polls. I don't think that's true, but Texas and Florida easily, and Georgia too, right? The Republicans would have lost a lot more races in 2018 in swing states, but they didn't. They held on to a lot of they held on to a lot of seats in Ohio and Georgia and Florida and even in Arizona with Brnovich. They held on to they won a governor's race in New Hampshire. Like the GOP still won plenty of swing races in 2018. It's not like every race that was within 5% didn't go their way. Donald Trump was unpopular in a lot of states, and the Republicans still did fine there, because the difference was a lot of Republicans didn't like Trump, or the people, and it's even less for Trump than it is for Biden, but a lot of people had nitpicks with Trump. They said they voted for Republican anyways. If you think that there aren't any voters who are saying they disapprove of Biden and they're going to vote for the Democrats in November, I don't think that it's quite frankly not worth it to have a conversation with you, because you're misunderstanding how politics works. You are not going to be getting the exact number that approves of Biden and you voting for Democrats. If you think Democrats are going to get 41% of the vote in November, you're mistaken, because this is not... We don't live in an environment where you can go one election from winning the popular vote by 4% to losing the popular vote by 17%. That's not how this works. We're polarized, and approval rating can change. Obviously, Biden was at 54% approval in March 2021. He's now at 54% disapproval. But the votes don't change as much. There might have been people, like, there are probably plenty of progressives who, when Biden first came into office and saw the stimulus check or whatever, that he was doing a good job or whatever, who now disapprove of him because he hasn't had done any major progressive legislation since, right? Like you can make that argument. And while I disagree with it, it's still how many people think. So that's kind of my rant on Biden's approval. He's unpopular. I'm not denying that. He's if he ran for re-election, I don't even know if he'd win, to be honest. But I think that if you're basing the Democratic vote share in 2022 off Biden's approval, you're just wrong. So anyways, now that we've eliminated the approval rating from how we're forecasting the 2022 midterms, what else do we have? Well, we've got some more polls. We've got generic ballot polling, which currently on 538 has the GOP winning it by 2.2%, which is not too shabby considering polls generally underestimate Republicans, although that probably won't happen again to the scale it did in 2020 and 2016, because, spoiler alert, polls are terrified and they're going to be oversampling Republicans whatever chance they get. Anyways, the polls right now have the GOP up by 2 in the generic ballot, and the same polls that are going to have the GOP win the generic ballot by 3 or 4%, like Emerson or YouGov, which are good pollsters, by the way, like R+3, R+4 aren't terrible baseline expectations for the midterms. They have the GOP losing Michigan by 30 points, losing Nevada by 20 points, and have Ohio Senate as a toss-up. So if you choose to believe these polls that the Republicans are winning the generic ballot by 4%, which, by the way, is still not bad for the Democrats, because considering how unpopular Biden is, you'd think they'd be losing it by a lot more. But anyways, if that's your baseline expectation, that's fine. But you also, if you're believing these polls, you also have to believe the polls that are good for Democrats too, because there are plenty of polls that are good for Democrats. And so what we're seeing is that nationally, here's the thing. The lesson from Virginia is to believe state polls over national polls, because the national polls said the Democrats should have won that race by 6 or 7 based on national partisanship and Biden approval at the time. The state polls had Youngkin, I think he was up by 1% at 538 the day that the election happened, and he won by a similar amount. The polls in Virginia were quite good. So you can trust the state polls, you can trust the national polls. Guessing polling misses is a hard game. I'm willing to play because I think it's the best we have. I played it in 2020 and did pretty well off of it, although you can make the argument that was dumb luck because in 2021 I got Virginia wrong. I had McCall winning by 1.5 on election day and he lost by 2. So you can play that game. I'm going to play it this midterm because I think that I have enough confidence in my ability to do so that I'll do it. But I think the lesson that we learned from Virginia in 2020, as well as 2020, because the polls in 2020 were awful all across the board, except in Georgia and there were a few states where the polls were good, but overall national polls were awful. Polls in the Midwest were terrible too. Polls in states like Arizona and Florida and North Carolina cannot be trusted. Georgia was okay for whatever reason. I don't know why. But yeah. So, anyways, the thing we learned from Virginia and New Jersey is that you can either trust national polls or state polls. And for now, I'm going to trust state polls with the major asterisk, meaning that if they're really, really bad, I won't trust them. So if we get a poll out of Missouri that has the Democrats winning the Senate race by 3%, I'll throw it in the garbage. But, if it's a Georgia poll that does Warnock up by 2, it's not unreasonable. It's not crazy. And so I'll be trusting state polls until I have a reason not to. Or I shouldn't say trusting them, but I'll be trusting them more than federal polls, because federal polling has the GOP winning the generic ballot by 2 while Biden's 14% underwater, and 13% underwater, whatever. And the thing with that is that, if you made people say, the voters on election day 2022 say whether they want Democrats or Republicans in Congress, I think we're going to get a pretty even number. And again, no third option, no undecided, no nothing. I think you get a number 49-51 in favor of the GOP, something like that. It would be really close, though. That's a better way of judging this than Biden approval or generic ballot. Generic ballot's weird because you can ask them whether they want Democrats or Republicans in Congress or who they'd vote for. But the thing is, the idea of a Republican is much better than the actual Republican. We're seeing that because the GOP have a good position, but they're doing everything they can to lose the Senate and to not do well in these governor's races either. And when they're running these candidates like Doug Mastriano, like Herschel Walker, like Blake Masters, like Carrie Lake, when you see these array of candidates that the GOP are running, you're like, are you guys trying to lose? Are you guys trying to make races that should be lean or lightly Republican into toss-ups? Because candidate quality still matters, and there are plenty of people who like the Republican Party more than the Democratic Party, but the candidates are better. The Democratic candidates are more appealing than Republican candidates, especially to moderates in the suburbs, which, by the way, are going to decide these elections. So that's where I'll leave it at. I think generic ballot polling is helpful, but it's not the thing I'd want to base my predictions off of. So instead, I'll be looking at some state polls, and I'll be reading them off to you, and you can tell me whether you think, or not tell me because I'm on a podcast and you're just listening, but you can tell me what you think, or you can DM me or whatever you want to do. I don't mind DMs on Twitter. I got in a few after episodes, people saying, cool episode, I disagree with XXXY, that's fine with me. Anyways, point being, so the most recent governor polls we've got were out of Michigan from the Michigan Information and Research Service poll, which is a C-rated, it was from Target Insight. It was sponsored by the Michigan Information and Research Service poll, my apologies, and it's a C-rated pollster. It called 600 registered voters, so the number's pretty small, but the amount of voters but the registered part of it is good. And they asked them an array of candidates to the GOP. These were the same 600 voters, by the way. And so they said Whitmer or Soldano, Rinke, Rebrandt, Kelly, and Dixon. Kelly and Dixon are the only two candidates I should know much about because, they're they're essentially the front runners for this primary, though it's still pretty weak. Kelly, I think, was at January 6th, and Tudor Dixon is just kind of, she's as Trumpian, as committed to the election fraud thing, but whatever. So I'm assuming it'll either be Kelly or Dixon for the GOP nomination now that James Craig has failed to qualify for the ballot. But the point being, the polls we've gotten for Whitmer have been really, really good, really good. And we see these polls that they had Biden underwater in the state of Michigan by, I think, a couple. It was pretty good. It was pretty big, actually. He was underwater in Michigan by 19%, and not good for the president in a state he won by 3% last time around. But this doesn't really matter because Biden can be unpopular all he wants, but as long as it doesn't hurt the Democrats, I don't think he cares. But Biden's down 19 in Michigan, and Whitmer was up by 8. So that's a 27% crossover between the people that disapprove of Biden but like Whitmer. And it's, again, because the idea of Biden is right now less popular than essentially every Democrat in Congress, in every statewide official, whatever you want to say. And right now, every generic Republican is more popular than the people they're actually running because the people they're running aren't good candidates, with the exception of, Laxalt's all right, but he's not that good. Like, there are no, really, really good candidates that I can think of for the GOP. Like, they're all either mediocre or just not electable. And so, point being, with Biden being unpopular in Michigan, but Whitmer being popular, it's kind of an existential question for the GOP because, Biden, like I said, Biden can be unpopular all he wants, but he doesn't care unless he costs the Democrats the midterms. And they're hammering Biden, and they're going to continue to do so, which is good for them, I guess. But those attacks are Biden, they're chucking rocks, and they're assuming that they're hitting both Biden and Whitmer, and they're only hitting Biden. Whitmer is +8 in approval. Her approval is actually surging for whatever reason right now. She's ahead in every poll we've seen, even against James Craig, who's not going to be running for the GOP anymore because he got disqualified from the ballot. But he was a good candidate. He probably would have beat her, actually. But Whitmer. Anyways, the latest poll we saw had Whitmer beating Kelly by 34%, not 34 votes, 34%, and Dixon by 37%. So I don't believe those numbers, but you never want to be down by 34, 37% in a poll in a swing state like Michigan. That's just not what you want for the GOP. And we saw a similar poll out of Nevada from the University of Nevada that had Sisolak beating Joe Lombardo by 12 and Dean Heller by 23%. So, yeah, that's really bad for the GOP because you'd think, and again, this poll had Biden underwater too. And every poll we've seen, we like Biden's unpopular. He's negative 20 points in a swing state he won 2 years ago. And the Democrats, or the Democratic candidate for governor, for senator, for House, or whatever, has a has a plus 7% favorability rating. So unless the GOP can actually hit Whitmer and Sisolak and these Democratic governors, they won't be doing as well as they think they are. And so I think right now, I think both Whitmer and Sisolak are favored. Whitmer, I think, is favored outright. I think she'll win. I think Sisolak's still tossed up, but I'd tilt towards him winning. Whitmer, I think, is in a lean Democratic race, and I move the rating from toss up to lean Democratic since Craig didn't qualify for the ballot. But yeah, that's it for the governor's map. So Nevada and Michigan, I think, both stay blue for now. In the Senate, we also have gotten some good polls for Democrats. In Florida, Marco Rubio is only up by 6%. And it was actually an A- rated pollster, public policy polling, which in fairness is a Democratic pack, but it also is decently good for whatever reason. But, Rubio only being up 6 in this poll is actually pretty good for the Democrats. And then University of Nevada did a poll with Cortez Masto against both Sam Brown and Adam Laxalt. She was beating Brown by 23% and Laxalt by 21%. For whatever reason, the Nevada GOP endorsed Sam Brown, but Laxalt has the Trump endorsement. He'll probably get the nomination, and she was down by 21%, despite the fact that Biden is still pretty unpopular in Nevada. And then J.D. Vance was only beating Tim Ryan by 2%, which is stunning to me because he was, Suffolk University is a really good pollster, and they call a decent amount of people here. And Vance, this is a decently credible poll, and he was only up by 2% against Tim Ryan. And Sherry Beasley was only losing to Ted Budd by about a point in the most recent Meeting Street Insights poll, which is a GOP internal. He was only up by 1 in his own internal, which isn't good. And then Blake Masters got the Trump endorsement last week, and he's down by 16 to Mark Kelly. So that's not good either for the GOP. And yeah, I don't think, I'm not even an optimist for Democrats. My current Senate prediction is I'm stubborn. I still have the Democrats at 48 seats in the Senate, although Arizona and Georgia, I think, are really, really close. I had them both as lean Republican a few months ago, and even dating back to April. That was just, wow, I don't know. I really, Georgia to me is just so close. I don't even want to make a prediction. I don't even know who's there in that race. And then with Arizona, I think Masters is favored like narrowly. Like he probably has like a 55% chance of winning or something. He's like the slimmest of favorites, I'd say. And yeah, Kelly is a fundraising machine. He has all the cash in the world. Masters is also pretty rich too, so I think he won't have as big of a fundraising disadvantage as Lamone or Brnovich would have had. But he's not a good candidate. He's really, really Trumpy. He wants to I think he said he wants to ban condoms, and he has a bunch of other weird policies. And I'm like, all right. Anyways, that's like someone who wants to like ban these items that don't hurt anyone else. Like banning condoms is such a waste of time. But the fact that the GOP is going to run someone like Blake Masters in a state as moderate as Arizona to me is worrying for them. But they might win just because of national environment, although, again, the national environment seems to be a little overstated for them. But, my current estimate is the GOP win it by about 3.5-4%, somewhere in that ballpark. And, I've seen estimates that are more favorable to Democrats, that some that are more favorable to Republicans. But the point being that the Democratic Party right now is like the national polls make it look like it's going to be 2010 all over again. The state polls make it look like it's going to be 2002 or like even a year decent for Democrats, like, maybe 20, like, not 2020, maybe like 2020 light, or like maybe the 2012 House elections where the Democrats only won the popular vote by about a point, which I don't think the generic ballot will be D+1, but it's not crazy to say the way it was a few months ago. But, so my current Senate prediction, again, Arizona, I'll say, is like the tiltiest of tilts. Georgia, I don't even want to characterize. That puts the GOP at 51 seats and the Democrats at 48, and yeah, I'm just filling out a map. GOP at 51, Democrats at 48. Georgia is like literally a pure toss. I don't even want to talk about it right now because it's so close. And then the governor's map, I don't have the map pulled up right now, but I think the Democrats are going to hold on to Nevada, Michigan, Pennsylvania, that thing, and they're going to lose. New Mexico's going to be close too. I think it's narrowly leaning towards the Democrats though, but I think they lose Georgia. I think they lose Wisconsin. I think they lose Nevada. And they probably don't, like, I'd be surprised if they are within 10 in Kansas, or if they can come within 15 in Texas or Ohio or Iowa. So, yeah, and if they come within 5 in Florida, I'll be impressed too. But, yeah, again, pretty short episode, but that's it. Guys, I don't know what to say here because the generic ballot polling makes it look like, not even generic ballot. Generic ballot looks like it'll be a decent year for Republicans, not that good of a year. But, the Biden approval numbers aren't good for the Democrat, or seemingly aren't good for Joe Biden. But every other poll we've seen says it's going to be a pretty competitive midterm with, both parties getting a fair, a pretty good amount of the votes. So, if you take away one thing from this podcast, please let it be that anyone who says the GOP is going to win the national environment by 8% are lying, and that it's not going to be 2012, it's not going to be 2010, it's not going to be 2014, it's not going to be 1994. It's going to be, it's good for Republicans, but I don't think it'll be a big red wave where Democrats lose every Senate seat and the GOP aren't getting to 240 in the House. I saw a House prediction that them at 240. I currently have the Democrats I currently have the GOP at 228 seats in the House. So that's my current baseline prediction. They might get to 235, but 240 is a bit of a stretch. So those are my predictions as of right now. Criticize me all you want. But, yeah, thanks for listening, and I'll see you all in the next podcast.